Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. It is 2:15 in the afternoon, so I'm expecting the energy levels to be a little bit low. So I'm going to do my best to bring them up a little bit, and we can start and welcome on our guests in the traditional manner, if you don't mind. So, David?
Where do you want me?
Anywhere you want. And Liam, if you want to take a place as well.
Hello, Liam. How are you? Good to meet you.
So I'm going to stand down here, if that's okay. Don't let it put you off. So my name's Steve Neighbour. I am a chartered civil engineer, 28 years in the railway. I hosted a TV thing called The Freight Escape, and one of the punishments for doing that is I get asked to host things like this as well. And I am a civil engineer. I provide new infrastructure, but don't hold that against me. I'm going to try and do this in a way that respects your greater knowledge about freight as well. So, do you just want to introduce yourselves first, and then we'll kick into it?
Okay, so thanks ever so much for the invite to come here today and talk as part of the panel on future freight traction. So my name is Liam Day. I'm currently GB Railfreight's Interim Managing Director. I've been with GB Railfreight for 12 years, had a bit of a time with Network Rail prior to that, but with GB Railfreight for 12 years doing a number of different roles in commercial, in assets, in property and facilities, and have taken on the role of Interim Managing Director about 3 months ago. So, yeah, lovely to be here.
Thank you. And David?
Thank you. I'm just having microphone problems. So, yeah, thank you for inviting me along as well. So, Dave Penney, I'm the Chief Exec for Heavy Haul Rail, which is the new company that formed after the split of Freightliner into intermodal and bulk. So we look after the bulk traffic. So
I'm going to start with David. The Heavy Haul brands, the name, the split. Just expand on that, just so anyone in the audience who might want to know more on why.
Yeah, super. Yeah. So as I said before, so Freightliner was an integrated organisation that had both rail, road, and terminals. With the sale, Heavy Haul took the bulk movement by rail part of the business, which is roughly £150 million revenue turnover a year. We're serving about 20 of the biggest kind of bulk customers by rail in the UK, running kind of 200, 250 services a week, and significantly playing in particularly the kind of aggregates and cement markets, but also looking to diversify into other areas as well.
And also supply some of our engineering works as well, which are vital for keeping the infrastructure going as well.
Yes,
so thank you for everything you do on that. And you've got a new addition at the show this year. Do you just want to talk about that? And I'll come back to David on his new thing as well.
Yeah, so we have our Class 99s being showcased here. It's a locomotive which has been manufactured in Valencia in Spain with Stadler. We now have 10 as of this week in the country. 9 of them are past their sort of fault-free running and are out now on testing. We intend to run our first commercial service with a Class 99 next month, but they're essentially a bi-mode locomotive, so they can operate under the wires and on diesel, and they have the clout to be able to haul substantial loads in both forms, really. So that was our key aspiration, was to produce a locomotive for the UK market that was a bi-mode loco, for reasons I'm sure we'll come on to, but had a diesel engine which was capable of hauling the heaviest loads out there. Yeah.
And just before we talk about the bi-mode, hydrogen and the use of that in terms of what you're thinking about. Do you want to expand on where we are with that?
Yeah, thank you. So I also want to nick your 99 before the end of the... we'll just see if we can re-vinyl it and take it away. So yeah, what we brought along today was our Class 66, the first that's been re-liveried in the new Heavy Haul Rail colour scheme, and then a couple of container wagons that have got a kind of UK first, essentially, in association with GeoPura, moving hydrogen by rail. We did the first kind of test and train of that back in autumn last year at High Marnham, and then wanted to bring it here as well to kind of show the concept of what has to be a growth area for rail freight to move in the future.
Just on that point, over the next 10, 15 years, what's your perspectives, respectively, on what the form of power is for our locomotives going forward?
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So I don't think there's going to be one solution. I think that's quite clear. We'd all like to have more money to spend on more locomotives like the Class 99, but I think in reality we'll be looking at all sorts of types of fuel and solutions to that problem. There's a couple of us from a freight operating perspective that have managed to make the use of HVO stick from a commercial perspective with at least one or two customers. But I think we're going to be seeing a combination of things. For fuels like HVO, trying to invest where we can in new traction, but there's not going to be one solution, I don't think.
No, I'd echo Liam's points really, because what we've got to do is still make rail freight effective and efficient, that a customer will want to use that as an option. And so we've got to improve on the current kind of diesel locomotives we've got, but they're still a very environmentally friendly way of moving goods. On a kind of per ton basis, they're 6 or 7 times better from a kind of CO2 emissions than the equivalent fleet of lorries that you'd need on the road. So it's still a really efficient way to move goods. But obviously, it's then how and it is going to be a mix of new types of fuels, new types of locos, electrification clearly, which we can move on to as well later in the conversation.
And, where does the solution and development and implementation of that solution sit? Does it sit with the FOCs? Does it sit with government? Does it sit across GBR? Where do you think it's going to be driven from?
I think we've both got a part to play, haven't we? Yeah. And I think that's it. It's, at the end of the day, we're both logistics providers. And although we compete with each other when it comes to rail volumes, we compete, most heavily with road. It's about trying to make an attractive solution which is cost effective for the end customer. So there's an element that we can play in trying to find our own funding to develop our own sources of new traction, as we have done as GB Railfreight. But I think without a doubt we're going to need some support from a government perspective to see this sort of switch to a cleaner form of traction move far quicker. And I think, we are seeing some really, good and exciting things out there in terms of, growth targets being set, track access discount schemes being put in place to encourage new flows to the market. But we do need to go further than that. And I think something that recognises the potential for electric traction to free up capacity on the network, putting a value to that capacity and then seeing that value reflected in track access discounts is probably one of the ways that we can go. But I feel like there is a bit of momentum behind that. But it's really key in this crucial time for rail reform that we make that point and that voice heard really loud and clearly, and people, get focused on practical things that can be done to help incentivise that. But yeah, we've all got a part to play.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, again, just to build, the market sets the pace, but they will need certainty to invest. And so that's where government and that's where a long-term rail freight strategy helps, because, of course, it can then give certainty that is it worth us investing in an intermodal facility or new traction or a long-term contract by rail compared to other modes or even other countries. So you've got to provide the market that certainty that it's worth investing in and that they'll reap some benefit from it.
And are you getting the sense, if I can just move it into GBR on the traction strategy, do you sense that there is going to be a better voice in GBR, and is there worries in that, or is there, are you getting the government backing and Sir Peter Hendy's backing that voice for freight will be just as powerful for the whatever sustainable transition we make towards freight power?
I mean, I think it's taking the words, isn't it? Words of encouragement, and translating them into something which is written down and enshrined in legislation. A lot can change as different characters and people move on. So we want something which is concrete, something which is there for our investors to get focused on and say, I can see there's genuinely support here, and it's not going to change overnight. I think some of the people you've quoted, sort of Peter Hendy or talked about Peter Hendy, etc. There's some really good advocates out there for rail freight, and we've just got to make, again, this crucial time, that sort of thing really, really stick, and get that in legislation and give us that comfort for the future.
Yeah, and I think so. We've been doing a lot of work lobbying through Railfreight Group into the creation of the bill, which is where Lord Hendy's been, really useful. He's had ministerial roundtables that he's invited us to, so that the voice of rail freight is heard. But we've actually got to try and find it in a way that's a hook for lawmakers, policymakers, etc., to kind of understand the benefit of what they're doing. So Ely has been a long-standing investment that's just been kicked and kicked and kicked, and yet ultimately would release so much capacity across North London. So there's almost an angle that kind of says if the mayor wants to run additional passenger trains in North London, how do you kind of go, well, actually investment in Ely is the way for you to achieve that goal kind of thing, so it's a win-win for both, and it's trying to find those hooks for us.
And a lot of the traction options are related to the infrastructure ability to support those freight options. So for yourself, is Ely one of the big ones that you'd love to see movement on in terms of to support better freight?
There's a list now. I mean, the other thing that Lord Henry recommended and we need to keep at the top of our list is that kind of what's our top 5 priorities, so that no matter who we're engaged by, whether it be kind of local MPs, councils, economic forums who are creating their growth plans, right through then into kind of DFT and government, that every time they see us, they hear Ely, Thames Gateway electrification, et cetera, et cetera. That's what we've just got to keep pushing on, because there's some quite small investments really in the bigger picture of rail that would unlock so much difference for freight. So I've already mentioned kind of gateway electrification. I mean, what's that going to be? 3 miles, something like that, and it would then automatically unlock electric locos from end to end, which then obviously has a CO2 benefit, but also has a faster speed, higher payload kind of thing. So it's making sure that we've always got that, and that the requirements, what we're going to get out of that investment is still relevant. Otherwise, actually, to be fair, Ely becomes old news. Everyone just goes, oh, they're talking about that again, and you've kind of lost before you start. So.
And do you have a wish list as well for infrastructure?
Yeah, and some of them might vary a little bit to Dave's on the basis of, we've got a real incentive to try and get as much of the network now electrified as we can. I think that route between sort of Nuneaton and Hams Hall is really, really critical and crucial for us, and mainly feeding the intermodal sector, of which obviously we're still a player in. But I do think there are other things that we can think about as well. I can see sort of Neil Rattan in the top corner there as part of the East Coast sort of digital program and stuff. So we're having some really good conversations now about, well, as freight operators, we've had to sort of go out and grab whatever traction we can to keep the growth of rail freight going. We're now invested in 99s, but there's a bunch of sort of, older sort of traction that we're still having to rely upon. Well, we're part of a program now about digitalization, etc. How can we as operators potentially be incentivized to go and make an investment in something like a 99 and have some funding that maybe comes via the East Coast Digital Program or something like that to support that transition, rather than fitting some of the older locomotives that have a shelf life with ETCS equipment. So I think there's little ways that we can do things like that with projects that already exist that don't always necessarily have to be the big list of 5 infrastructure schemes that need to be completed. So we need to get a bit clever at doing those sort of things. Yeah, absolutely.
And let's stick with the 99s at the moment. Just talk us through the history. Why did we choose that particular model? How's it been? And how's it going?
Yeah, so I think when we set out 4 or 5 years ago to create a new locomotive for the rail freight market, we had a clear aspiration that we obviously wanted to make use of overhead wires and electric traction, but we also knew that we needed something that had, the power of a Class 66 locomotive under diesel to be able to haul those heavy loads, to complete the last mile deliveries, etc. So we sent what was our engineering director at the time, a chap called Bob Tiller, who sort of fits that mould of the sort of nutty professor out there coming up with the right solution, out to go and find something. And really cleverly what he did was took solutions that already exist, but compile them together in a Class 99 locomotive, which is fit for the UK market. So with the help of our colleagues at Stadler, we were able to create the 99. And it's amazing, isn't it, how long these things take to come to life? But that order was probably placed 3 or 4 years ago. So we're only starting to see that be delivered upon now. But yeah, the early signs are it's really, really encouraging. My boss, John Smith, CEO of GB Railfreight, most of you will know him. He's quite a character. He's seen everything now, and it's a lot to take him to get excited about something new. And he was literally screaming from the rooftops yesterday as he rode that train out of London Gateway. So to see him that excited about it, it really does go to show what this locomotive is capable of doing. Yeah.
We were talking just before we started to talk about why you chose that particular bi-mode, not tri-mode. Is that worth just expanding on?
Yeah, I mean, so it's a modular build, so essentially as and when if battery technology gets to the point where we can replace the diesel engine, we can do it. But fundamentally, we've got a market to serve now, a customer base that we want to serve now, and we needed space for the diesel engine, and it needed to be big enough to be able to do the job. So that's why we settled really on that bi-mode solution. Yeah.
And David, expanded on the hydrogen as a possible option, and just talk to you about the experience you've learned over the last few years in terms of that space.
Yeah. So I'll row back a little bit. Is that where we started actually was using alternative fuels such as HVO, which has definitely seen a benefit. It has a huge CO2 benefit without any real kind of loss of energy, power, fuel capacity, all that kind of good stuff. The challenge is that we don't necessarily see the market willing to pay for that additional, and that definitely can help when we get back to kind of how can government help. It's how can you incentivise customers to kind of bridge that gap so that there's a decarbonisation incentive. But then we started looking at hydrogen, and we've had a number of partnerships over the last couple of years now, which was looking at how you could make hydrogen as a realistic prime mover for freight locos. I'm going to be honest and say we've not got to a point yet where, as a mainline locomotive, we could get the fuel range where hydrogen becomes a compelling alternative at the moment. The energy density is such you'd almost have to have the first vehicle behind as your fuel tank. Yeah. And frankly, when every wagon counts, right? We're a bit like the Ryan Iron model, where the last couple of wagons is what's made your profit. If you've got lost space for a hydrogen wagon at the front, you're not going to make it work. But the fact is, the actual technology to make it, a traction motor works. It's just we've got to find a way to get it packaged in rail traction correctly.
And we will come to the audience. If anyone wants to put a hand up at any point to ask a question, more than happy to come to the audience. Oh, straight away, sir. I like your keenness. Even though it's the middle of the afternoon, slightly hot.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm Adam Holyoke from Network Rail. I'm going to apologise because you're not going to like me after these three questions. Number one, you talked about HVOs. How are you going to cope with dealing with competitors from other industries that HVO is going to be their only solution for decarbonisation, i.e. aviation, and their power in buying is going to destroy anything we have? Number two, what will you do if, when and or local governments finally sort themselves out and make clean air zones applicable to rail and airports, so your Class 66s with your 710 engines that are two-stroke V12s that are chugging away, being absolutely filthy, are going to get absolutely hammered if they decide to hit that? And number three, the solution, well, I think for rail freight traction would be ammonia fuel cell. You get the energy density of diesel, but running a fuel cell.
There's a number of ones to unpack there, aren't there? So, I mean, ultimately, frankly, if other markets like airlines, etc., invest in the technology that gets to a point where there is like a cheaper HVO alternative, then we'll grab it, right? The issue is not our unwillingness to adopt that technology, it's just whether the market can afford the price point. So I'd welcome anything that kind of brings that down. And we've been looking at synthetic fuels as well, which ironically are being championed in kind of Formula One and things like that. So if actually you get F1 that then gets Mercedes-Benz or BMW or whatever to then start doing something in volume, I'll grab it, So ultimately we've just got to, and that's where government plays its part as well, kind of thing, is if there's no incentive for rail to follow, then we're not going to. But the moment it's there and it makes economic sense, we'll do it. So I'm just trying to unpack the other questions. I'm not sure if you've got any.
Well, I was going to say that the greatest incentive that we've had at the minute to sort of incentivise that switch to, I guess, fuels like HVO is ironically been a fuel crisis when it comes to the price of oil. So you've sort of narrowed the gap between the two. But the point that you made at the start is exactly the right one. It is a real struggle. We don't feel that we're up that top end of the pecking order when it comes to where HVO supplies are going to be prioritised. And we know aviation probably leads the way in that regard. At the minute, we still struggle from that pricing perspective to get someone to commit to it long term. So that's why it's being used only sort of few and far between currently. So I guess if there's a future where we can be part of that sort of collective buying mechanism to make it more affordable for our customers, we'd be part of that. But I don't see us necessarily at the minute being prioritised above anything like aviation. I think you mentioned the clean air zones and things. Don't have an immediate solution for that. bar every time that we've invested in a new diesel engine, we've tried to make it as clean as is physically possible. It would be a bit counterproductive, it feels, to turn off something like Railfreight based on its environmental credentials, even hauling it with a Class 66, in favour of potentially putting more vehicles on the roads as associated with a sort of inner city clean air zone or whatever. So hopefully we can lobby hard for that. I think as Dave sort of touched on, we're constantly trialling things and looking to trial things. So perhaps the next solution for sort of deliveries into clean air zones is not that far away, The last point, sorry, Dave.
Well, I was just building on that, and then also we might be able to remember the last point was I totally agree that clean air zones, you've just got to start making the point of just how much more efficient even a 66 haul train is compared to the lorries that you'd be sending around the ring road instead. You can fit scrubbers as well. Again, if we get to the point where we're definitely going to see that legislated, then clearly that's where we'll have to go, and we'll need the help of the rolling stock industries to help us get there, So we'll grab onto any kind of technology that works that way. The other one then is just helping incentivise use of the overheads, because and I found this maddening when I first joined Railfreight, is that essentially your kind of EC for T, the charge you'll pay for using electric through the overhead lines, is sometimes more expensive than diesel, right? And yes, the global prices will kind of sometimes help offset that balance, but we found ourselves having to deliberately make a policy decision to use electric locos, even knowing it'll actually make the flow less profitable. And we've got to get away from that and find an incentive that encourages us to go down that line.
It's actually quite hard as well, isn't it, Dave? As a pricing mechanism to your end customer, it's really hard to describe how EC for T works,
yes.
And how you make it add up and make sense for that end customer. Time of day, commodity that you're hauling, weight of the train, etc., all have this impact. So it's actually quite hard to sort of articulate to an end customer, this is how we're going to charge you for this type of fuel. But yeah.
And I mean, you might be aware through the Network Rail side there is a process by which you can technically do something called sleeving, where you can buy green energy and then effectively ask for that to be what you pay for through Network Rail. That's taken time, and it's still taking time to kind of get that across the line. So that would help. That would help us get there. And then actually the other one that from an industry system we've got to improve on is I can use a 40-year-old, 30-year-old Class 90 loco that's got grandfather rights on a particular piece of electrified railway. You'll be jumping through hoops to get a 99 approved on the same. And it's kind of like, hold on, we're doing the right thing here. We've got to make it easier and simpler to run it.
I also think you're wrong. I think our panel actually like your questions. I don't think they're going to hold a thing against you at all. So, really good questions, and thank you very much.
Yeah,
so, what was that?
Yeah.
I've just finished my master's. So I just completed my master's and my dissertations on clean air at rail freight depots. Nice. I've done half the calculations. I just asked you the questions too.
Come and visit us then. Seriously, come and visit us, and we'll have a day and kind of learn. That's the way to do it.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Really good questions. Thank you. What is the biggest misconception people have about decarbonising freight traction? Do you think? What's the biggest misconception that people have?
I mean, as I see it, but I would say it because I'm a predominant operator of Class 66 and Class 59, is just the age of the loco, and therefore a kind of presumption that a 40-year-old loco, two-stroke diesel, etc., is a bad place to start. But actually, fundamentally, as I've said earlier, even against the most modern kind of Tier 6 emission, and your dissertation will probably prove me wrong, but anyway, is the stats that I've got to hand anyway would suggest that we're still a environmentally credible option compared to that. So it's how you kind of go, all right, let's accept that that's a good starting point and then build on it. I mean, similarly, I would say is the rush to go, well, it has to be new locos as the answer to everything. Well, 130 tonnes of steel, how much carbon's emitted to create a new loco when you could be doing cost-effective modifications to existing? So there's answers all the way in the middle of all that, but that's the challenge, is just not to assume that old loco equals wrong.
Yeah, and I think it's trying to. I think some people have this expectation that we have a customer base that is all chomping at the bit to do the right thing from a sustainability perspective regardless. And that's not the case. You start from a point where it's a logistics offering, it's a part of their supply chain, it's part of their end price to their end customer. And you have to get the economics and the commercials right in the first place in order to afford the sustainable solution. So it doesn't make sense for everybody to go and pay that money to see that sort of sustainable solution put on the front of their trains. And some people think that's just a given that people will invest. But we're talking very tight margins across the board. So it's difficult, yeah.
And just talking about investment, do you think freight can realistically achieve net zero without a significant expansion in our electrification network to support it? Or does it need to go hand in hand with that?
Yeah, I think hand in hand. So I think, you know, we are at sort of 35-40% of the network running on overheads at the minute, or electrified to make use of the overheads at the minute. That's got to increase. I think the sort of overhead solution and electrification feels like the way that you're going to solidly make a step change. So that investment in that area needs to continue. And I think, yeah, it goes hand in hand with trying to achieve a net zero position for sure. Yeah.
I mean, you know, diesel burn is the biggest part of my kind of impediment to net zero. So unless we've got some alternative, then yeah, we're not going there.
Yeah. Any more questions from the floor before I go for a few more? Okay. Don't think I saw a hand move. So as the industry seeks to decarbonise freight traction, how do we ensure that transition supports rail freight growth rather than adding cost and complexity that could put traffic back onto the roads?
Well, I suppose we started to touch on it. You know, it's firstly that the process by which you can get, say, like new traction is simplified so that you don't find yourself kind of prohibited from using a new loco on a piece of line that you can use, you know, an old loco kind of thing. Then there's clearly the bits of missing electrification that would kind of completely allow you to not use diesel, or at least only in the terminals kind of thing. And then, of course, that then where you can start to balance your, do I need a little bit of battery as well, so that actually I can shunt in the terminal on battery, charged off the overheads in between, so that actually you're getting to the point where do I even need a diesel engine, and if I do, it's a little donkey engine or something, you know, similar kind of thing. But it's got to be helped by that kind of long-term growth and investment, because the only way that I'm going to be able to afford new locos and have customers who could afford the cost that means for running a train is if we know that there's incentives to help that work. So there's things like modal shift, grants from government which have been helping us kind of go, a new service to rail can attract a reduction in track access for a period of time. Can we move to also having some form of kind of net zero shift kind of scheme as well that does the same? So it's packaging it all that in a way that kind of makes the economics work.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't think there's a huge amount else that I would add, apart from just to ensure all those different bits that Dave's touched on become aligned in one sort of clear strategy. And I think the longevity of the commitment to those different elements is really key. So if we get what we need from a legislative perspective as part of rail reform, you know, that gives us some long-term certainty. We've just had, I think, the track access discount scheme extended to apply to services not only just for the first 6 months, but for 12 months. You know, is there a way of looking even more longer term than that to see if that sort of turns a number of other flows on from what we have today? But also the bit that goes behind that is the work that it takes to get that flow from operating on day one with a track access discount to operating under its own right in 18 months. And that requires the freight operators to work together with Network Rail, et cetera, to ensure that the things you committed to doing, i.e. running longer, running heavier in that time, working with your customer base to try and fill the empty spaces on your train, et cetera, all of that comes together to sort of move it from effectively being subsidised into something that runs under its own right. So I think, and I know, you know, it's in the offing, but that overarching oversight from an industry perspective, where somebody within GBR, a team within GBR, is leading on that, controlling all of that, joining those different things up is really critical. Yeah.
Okay.
And I'd just say, I think that then neatly leads back to the hydrogen wagons out there kind of thing, is that what kind of assistance can you get to actually start to get new traffics onto rail. So one of the kind of hindrances we have at the minute is coal, steel, aggregates, etc. have almost had an inbuilt ability for rail to penetrate because the network and the plants were all kind of built symbiotically together, right? But the moment you want to start moving hydrogen, well, we're not in the right place. And then the amount of time it can take to get a new connection laid down, a new siding put in, whatever, then is just becoming inhibitive to getting a shift to rail. So there used to be freight facilities grants, which was a great way in the kind of 80s and 90s that kind of brought new traffic to rail. It's kind of what's the modern equivalent of that. And so if you take hydrogen, a lot of work is being done from a hydrogen producer, hydrogen supply chain, hydrogen user to say we need assistance across this as a package. How do we make sure rail's considered in that package and not just road?
So a year ago, I was lucky enough to host this, and it was a different panel. So you're okay with what I'm about to say? And a member of the panel said, Andy Burnham, he hates freight, was the panel members a year ago, because he never wants to be stood on a passenger platform in Manchester and a freight train come through that could stop my passenger train. I don't want that type of world, was the panel's members' story that they told about Andy Burnham. If there's a government leader change, do you have a perspective on what that means for the freight industry and how we go into that? And
I mean, ultimately, the bill will have the benefit that it starts to enshrine in law freight growth, and it makes it a requirement of GBR to achieve it. So, if we had a new leader who had a kind of specific local issue, then we'll need to work around that kind of thing. But it's reminding everybody, whether it be Andy or anyone else, of kind of like, how many jobs is that creating in your area? What does that mean for, there is a need for a necessity of that. How many HGVs will go around the ring road instead and be creating, cracks in the foundations of the houses next door to the road? So you've got to package it in a way that it's not just, okay, I just saw that thing snaking through the Castlefield corridor, get rid of it, to okay, I understand why that's got to be. Or, we've been trying to find a different way around that for years. If you can just unlock a bit of investment, we'll get it out of the Castlefield corridor. Yeah, exactly.
Or wherever. And did you want to?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm relatively relaxed about leadership contenders, etc., etc. I think for me it's important that at the point that you get to policy making, at the point that you get to the actual running of the railway, that you've got people who have the experience and knowledge and understanding of the railway, of logistics, of running businesses that are making the decisions and effectively running the operation. As long as they are left to be able to make the right calls and the right decisions, then I think we're in a good place. Yeah.
I think you've scared everyone by the quality of your question, that no one wants to kind of put a follow-up with another question. But if anyone does, thank you, sir, at the back there. That would be brilliant. Yeah, people with hearing aids generally like to come through the speakers. That makes a real difference.
Yeah, Nigel Oatway, formerly of DB Cargo. I'd just like to ask the panel, is there any, with new traction, is there any work being done at the moment to look for a replacement for the Class 92s, or at least update the Class 92s, as they're the only freight traction that can go through the tunnel presently?
So from our perspective, we've got a fleet of. Hello, Nigel. By the way, it's been so many years since I've sort of spent some time with Nigel. Nigel was a great help when I was just starting out in my railway career. So great to see you. From my perspective, we've got a fleet of 12 Class 92s. Currently we have an agreement whereby we have a couple of those locomotives that are part of the Channel Tunnel operation, and then we use the rest on running our Caledonian sleeper services. So it is clear from a 92's perspective that it is getting more difficult as time goes on to keep them operational, to deal with obsolescence issues, etc., etc. There are quite a few hurdles to get through, but we are confident that a Class 99 could do the job Channel Tunnel-wise in the future. Right. And as the weeks go by, I get more confident in that space. So, yeah, a few hurdles to get through, but for us, that would be the direction of travel, yeah.
That's great. Thanks, Liam. Thank you.
I'm from Wales and West, and I thought you were talking about the Severn Tunnel for a moment. If I can expand it onto GBR, I'll give you my worry about GBR, if that's okay. So in GBR, the general design is you'll have an integrated business unit closest to the passenger, and that is the current TOC, the current route together, and that's the main structure of the new GBR. And my worry about that, and I raise this because I think we need to really air it, is that if the TOC's together with the infrastructure manager and maintenance, freight's over here. I'm going to focus on my infrastructure, my TOC, etc. So how do we ensure that we do the right thing as the industry to make sure that freight has its equal place on the infrastructure?
I mean, for me, it's going to have to be that from the top down, you've got the right then incentives, objectives for what makes freight work in a particular region or routes kind of thing. So if they haven't got a KPI that prioritises freight, whichever we think is right, cancellations, performance, whatever, growth, whatever, then it's not going to get looked at, is it? So it's making sure that there's some relevant metrics that our route and regional directors will have to achieve as part of that, supported from the top, that kind of says every time you sit in front of the board, they're going to be asking you about that as much as they are about passenger. But it is a risk if the way in which the legislation's written kind of gives a duty to kind of prioritise GBR first on a kind of capacity allocation, is we've got to make sure we're fighting that is still a critical part of it, and you've got to translate that, say, into the growth target or whatever. So.
Yeah, I think we see some sort of route or regional differences today in the way that they deal with rail freight, but we have to be sure that that's improved upon and it actually doesn't get worse. So I think for us, the consistency across one route to the next and the mechanisms that you go through to get things done, the organisational structures, who to talk to about what, I think needs an element of consistency. I'm all for, I think, because we see the benefit in all walks of life about sort of empowering people locally, local management of an issue, closest to the problem, greatest understanding of the problem. I wouldn't deny that that's the direction to travel in. But from a freight perspective, being that most of our routes are national, you've got to have some consistency. When you cross a route boundary, you're not suddenly working to a different set of rules. And I think that's where I'd be keen to make sure that there's some certainty around, yeah.
Okay, any more questions? Yes, at the back there. Let's wait for you to get a mic. And apologies, Kathryn had to pull out at the last minute from the panel. She had a very important meeting to go to.
Paul Ryan from Freightliner. We've spoken a lot about electrification and it facilitating decarbonisation of rail freight with new locomotives. I'd be interested on your views of the capacity of the existing network and whether that will stifle new locomotives.
Capacity with respect to?
The power in the OLE.
Oh, okay, no. Absolutely. Well, you're probably experiencing that now, so I'll let you start.
Yeah, I mean, I think even without the introduction of our Class 99s, there are pinch points. And I think some of them reared their head, actually, in the last couple of weeks or so. So we know that is a problem. But I guess every new rail project, whether it's the introduction of a new locomotive or introduction of a new signalling system, etc., is facing the same sort of debates. So I don't quite get the sense, it may be that I'm just not close enough to it, but I don't quite get the sense at the minute that there is a sort of national strategy that's addressing that issue well enough. But it's definitely, obviously, a cause for concern. If you're investing all the money that we have in a new locomotive fleet, you've got to be sure that you can run it where you want to, when you want to. And it does feel like a bit of a problem, yeah.
Yeah, I think it is a concern. I mean, probably a guilty knowledge question, because you and I used to talk about this. But what we've seen is actually some capacity in the network has been slowly removed over the kind of years from the 90s, and then now that we go back to reuse more electric traction, kind of having to catch that back up, and then the imposition of standards change will mean what was there before cannot just be replaced in the same mode again, right? So it just takes longer. Even just, approvals to get D&O connections, as anyone who's done OLE projects in Network Rail will know, you need to probably ask 10 years out to get a new D&O connection kind of thing, and that's the bit that's taking too long. I also have a bit of a view personally. There's then how do you get the supply chain involved in this, that you can kind of go, we want to have an OLE or power upgrade project over the next 30, 40 years, and actually if you get in and design, build, maintain, operate, whatever, you can be part of it as well. So there's I think the OLE that goes around this very site, there was no D&O sufficiency here. So there's I think it's a Siemens product that's creating it. Well, isn't that what we need in other places? Kind of pop-up terminals, whatever that can do that kind of thing. So,
Liam, Dave, unless there's any more questions. Oh, last one. Well done, sir.
Hiya, my name's Barnaby Kirk. I am a Newcastle Mechanical Engineering student. Regarding capacity, what with HS2 coming, do you see a lot of extra capacity potential in the West Coast main line, particularly from London to Birmingham?
well, the challenge is going to be what of HS2 gets completed, because getting to Handsacre and therefore getting high-speed trains onto the HS2 network was what was releasing capacity for freight further south. But you also needed to bypass Handsacre in the end, which is what the original kind of Phase 2B was all about, to then get enough freight on the existing line as well. I mean, Handsacre is just going to become this pinch point, and a lot of work's had to be done across the freight industry to kind of fight for the protection of rail paths through that post HS2. So jury's out at the moment, really, and until we kind of know what the final spec's going to be for how many HS2 trains then have to get onto the classic network. We've got to kind of protect our options to make sure freight's not prejudiced by that.
I think Dave said it all. Yeah, I got nothing more to add here.
I was part of the Network Rail team that did HS2 Handsacre, so you kind of got me on a bit of a specialist topic there. So.
All right, can we thank our guests in the traditional way? Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Cheers.
Great, and thanks all for coming. Have a great day. Enjoy the rest of the show. Thank you.